After a 24-hour shift, with a coffee stain on her uniform and eyes heavy with sleep, she got into the wrong car. He looked at her, as if she tainted the very air he breathed. In room 407, her mother held her hand as if clinging to life itself. "Get out of my car now." The voice cut through the air like a blade. Clara started awake, heart pounding, not understanding for a second where she was. What had happened? Why was there a man in a dark suit beside her, looking at her as if she had committed a crime? The car was stopped at the exit of Mount Elizabeth Medical Center, along Orchard Road. The engine was running, the air conditioning cold. And that man, Lionel Lim, 38, with a tense jawline, brown eyes holding a coldness she had never seen on any face, his arm extended, pointing to the door, as if dismissing something that shouldn't be there. Clara blinked once, twice. Her stethoscope still hung around her neck, her backpack on her lap, the coffee stain on her green uniform that she hadn't even had time to change between shifts. 24 hours inside that hospital, 24 hours of pressure, of corridors, of decisions, of holding the hand of someone afraid they wouldn't wake up the next day. And now she was here in the wrong car with a man who looked at her as if she were invisible. The bad kind. The kind of invisible that gets in the way, that occupies space that isn't yours, that needs to be removed before it causes more damage. She began, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "I thought it was the grab car I called. I'm sorry, I'll go." "You trespassed into a private vehicle." Lionel did not lower his tone. There was no exploding rage, there was something worse. Disregard, controlled, measured, served at a cold temperature. "I don't know how you confused a private car with a grab car, but that's not my problem. My problem is that I need to leave here now, and you're sitting in my seat." Outside, the doorman of Mount Elizabeth Medical Center, a man in his 50s named Uncle Sam, who knew Clara by name, who knew she took her coffee black with no sugar, and who always asked about his daughter when they crossed paths in the corridor, stopped and stared. Not because he wanted to, but because Lionel's voice carried the kind of authority that makes people stop without realizing it. A grab car, waiting in line, honked once. Then twice. Orchard Road traffic had no patience for ceremony. Clara felt the heat rise to her face. It wasn't shame. It was something deeper, older, that feeling of being seen as less, of having her exhaustion ignored, of having her 24 hours of service treated as irrelevant in the face of 2 minutes of inconvenience from someone who had never spent an entire night on their feet caring for another person. She took a deep breath, picked up her backpack, calmly put the strap on her shoulder, and before opening the door, looked at him. Not with anger, not with tears, but with that direct, clear gaze that only those who have learned to stand tall when everything weighs them down can sustain. "It was a mistake," she said in a firm, low voice. "I won't apologize for being tired." And she stepped out. The door closed with a dry click. It didn't slam. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was dignified. And dignity in that moment weighed more than any answer she could have given. Uncle Sam was still watching. When Clara passed him heading towards the pavement, he opened his mouth as if to say something. She shook her head slightly. Not now. And she kept walking, her steps firm on the warm Singapore concrete, the city noisy and indifferent around her, as it always was, as it always would be. Inside the car, Lionel slammed his palm against the back of the front seat. "Let's go, Kumar." The driver, Kumar, 45, as discreet as any good professional who learns to be invisible during his boss's conversations, engaged the gear without a word, but his eyes appeared for a second in the rearview mirror, not out of carelessness, but out of involuntary humanity. Lionel did not see, or chose not to see. He was looking at his phone. 4 missed calls from the number saved as Mount E Private, MDM Lim. His stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with what had happened 30 seconds ago. It had to do with what had happened 3 days earlier, when the doctors had called him into a small, silent room and used words he still hadn't been able to organize in his head. His mother, MDM Lim, 67, had been hospitalized for 11 days and was getting worse. Clara found the correct grab car 2 blocks ahead. She got in, threw her backpack on the seat, rested her head against the cold window, and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. That was the detail no one understood about her. Clara Tan, 34, an ICU nurse with 8 years of experience, didn't cry in front of anyone, not because she didn't feel, but because she had learned in her very first year of the profession that some pains need a private place to exist, and that a hospital corridor, a car seat, or a busy avenue pavement were not that place. What she felt as Singapore passed by the window in the form of light and shadow and honks was a mixture she knew well: injustice and exhaustion. They weren't new, they were old companions. She had entered this profession knowing that she would be invisible most of the time, that people would call her when they needed her and look through her when they didn't need her anymore. She had learned to find the value of her work not in external recognition, but in the small, real moments. A patient's hand, squeezing hers in the middle of the night. The smile of someone who had arrived fearful and was leaving with hope. At Mount Elizabeth Medical Center, she had arrived 3 weeks ago to cover a vacancy in the private wing on the 4th floor, and in 3 weeks, she had become especially close to a patient in room 407, Madame Lim. A woman with white hair, lively eyes, and a way of smiling that made the room feel a little larger, who asked everyone's name, who remembered, who even on the most difficult days found a kind word to offer. Clara did not know at that moment in the grab car, while trying not to think about the man in the car, that Madame Lim had a son. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he was like. She only knew that Madame Lim waited for him every day, and that every day he didn't appear on time. He arrived late and left early, and Madame Lim never complained, only looked at the door with that smile of someone who had learned to transform absence into waiting. He has a lot on his plate. Madame Lim had said once, as Clara adjusted the IV drip, always has. Since he was a little boy, he carried everything alone. But his heart is good, my dear. It's just buried under a lot of heavy things. Clara had smiled, had thought, all mothers say that, had thought, it's not my place to judge, and had continued her work as she always did, with care, with presence, with that silent attention that makes a difference, even when no one is looking. That night, Clara arrived at her HDB apartment in Sengkang, showered, warmed up some leftover soup, and sat at the kitchen table with her clean uniform folded on the chair beside her, ready for the next day's shift, because she had already learned that true rest begins when you stop leaving everything for later. She looked at the uniform for a moment, thought about the man in the car, his cold voice, his extended arm, pointing to the door. You're sitting in my seat, as if she were a misplaced object, as if 24 hours of caring for other lives could be erased by 2 minutes of inconvenience from someone who never needed to be invisible to survive. She blew on the hot soup and decided at that moment what anyone with dignity would decide: to forget, to move on. Tomorrow was another day, another shift, other patients who needed her whole, not broken by memories of arrogant strangers in expensive cars. What she didn't know, and what fate had already decided, with that silent cruelty that only real life can orchestrate, was that forgetting would not be an option. Because the next day, when she pushed open the door of room 407, with the patient chart in hand and her smile already formed, for Madame Lim, there was a man standing by the window, his back to her, dark suit, shoulders tense as if carrying the world without asking for help. And when he turned, when his cold brown eyes met hers, the recognition was simultaneous, brutal, and absolutely inescapable. It was him, the man from the car. And for the first time since the night before, Lionel Lim's face lost all its armor for a fraction of a second. The silence lasted less than 3 seconds, but it was the kind of silence that doesn't disappear later, that remains stored in the body, in the tension of the shoulders, in the way the air stops circulating properly between two people who recognize each other at the worst possible moment. Clara did not recoil, did not let her hand tremble while holding the chart, did not allow her face to reveal anything beyond what was safe to reveal. Professionalism, presence. The same clear, direct gaze she had sustained on the Orchard Road pavement the night before, when he had pointed to the door of his own car, as if dismissing something worthless. Lionel stood by the window. The morning light streamed through the blinds in parallel lines, cutting the room into strips of brightness and shadow. He was in a suit again, dark gray this time, white shirt, no tie, as if he had come directly from somewhere that demanded formality, but had left no time to complete the ensemble. His brown eyes met hers, and for that fraction of a second, she had noticed at the entrance, there was something in there that wasn't coldness, it was shock. Then the shock was gone, and the coldness returned. "Are you a nurse here?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Clara responded with the same economy of words. She turned to Madame Lim, who was in bed with her eyes open and her smile already formed. That focused attention filled the room like a third character. "Good morning, Madame Lim. How was your night?" "Better," Madame Lim replied, her voice having that soft texture of someone who wakes slowly, carefully, as if the day were fragile and needed to be handled delicately. "You were in my dream, you know? You were telling me a story. I don't remember which one, but it was a good one." Clara truly smiled. because with MDM Lim, it was impossible not to truly smile. Then it was a good dream, she said, and began to check vital signs with the precise and calm movements of someone who has done this for years, of someone who has learned that the speed of gestures affects the patient's anxiety. Lionel watched, standing motionless, with that posture of a man accustomed to controlling environments and who at that moment realized he controlled nothing. Lionel, MDM Lim called, turning her head to her son. Do you know Clara? She's the best nurse on this floor. Ask anyone. We've met, he said. His voice came out neutral, controlled. Clara did not lift her eyes from the patient chart. Where did you meet? MDM Lim asked, with that genuine curiosity of someone who still believes coincidences are gifts. At the hospital exit, Clara answered before he needed to. Simple, truthful, without details that would hurt, without omissions that would lie. It was quick, and it was. It had been quick, painful, but quick. MDM Lim accepted it as if it made perfect sense, and smiled at her son again with that patient, unwavering love that only mothers who have forgiven much can sustain. Her hands heal, my dear. Really. When she holds my hand, I calm down. Do you believe that? Lionel didn't answer, but his eyes went to Clara's hands, which at that moment were writing something in the chart, firm, without hesitation, and lingered there for a second longer than they should have. He left the room 20 minutes later, when the attending physician arrived for the morning rounds. Clara remained as protocol, to assist with the examination, note down instructions, and ensure MDM Lim understood every piece of information without being alarmed by the technical vocabulary doctors sometimes forgot to translate. Dr. Marcus Lee, 52, head of the private wing on the 4th floor, a man of direct speech and economical gestures, examined the patient carefully, asked the usual questions, and then requested to speak with the responsible family member in the corridor. Clara stayed with MDM Lim. MDM Lim waited for the door to close, and then looked at her with those eyes that saw too much. He treated you badly, didn't he? Clara looked up, met her eyes. MDM Lim, I know my son, she said, without accusation, without drama, with that gentle sadness of someone who has accepted a difficult truth for a long time. When he's scared, he hardens. It's always been like that. Ever since he was 8, when his father left and he decided he would never let anything get too close again. Clara remained silent. He's not a bad person, MDM Lim continued. He's a man who learned to use harshness as a shield. And a shield, my dear, doesn't just protect from the outside, it protects from within too. And then, the person gets trapped. Clara looked at that woman, 67, white hair, hands marked by time, eyes that still held an impressive clarity, and felt something she couldn't name at that moment. It wasn't pity, it wasn't forgiveness, it was closer to understanding, the kind that doesn't change what happened, but opens up a millimeter of space so that the story doesn't freeze at a single point. Doctor, Lee said something important out there. Clara smoothly changed the subject, because that's what the situation called for. I need you to rest more during the afternoon. No long visits. No agitation. MDM Lim nodded, but held Clara's hand before she moved away. Will you keep taking care of me? The question was simple. Its weight was not. Yes, Clara replied. And it was true, because what had happened in the car was between her and Lionel. MDM Lim was not to blame for anything. MDM Lim was a patient, and Clara had chosen this profession precisely because she knew how to separate what hurts from what needs to be done. In the corridor, Lionel listened to Dr. Lee with his chin slightly raised and his arms crossed, the posture of a man trying to appear controlled while the ground slipped from under his feet. The doctor's words were measured, technical, but the meaning was clear. MDM Lim's condition had worsened in the last 48 hours. Her body was responding more slowly than expected. They needed to adjust the treatment. They needed more time. Above all, they needed her to remain calm, because emotional agitation directly interfered with the case's progress. She has a nurse who does an extraordinary job with her, Dr. Lee said, consulting the chart. Clara Tan. Your mother responds differently when she's present. More stable heart rate, fewer episodes of nighttime anxiety. This has real clinical value, it's not just an impression. Lionel remained quiet. I strongly recommend that the continuity of care be maintained, the doctor continued. A change of team now, at this moment, would be an unnecessary risk. Understood, Lionel said. His voice came out whole, but something inside him was not. The doctor moved away, and Lionel stood in the corridor on the 4th floor of Mount Elizabeth Medical Center, with the soft, constant hum of that environment around him. Footsteps, trolleys, low voices, the specific sound of a place where life and fear shared the same space. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to do with his hands. He looked at the closed door of room 407. On the other side, he knew. Clara Tan was taking care of his mother with those hands Millionaire Lim had described. With that presence the doctor had put in cold clinical terms, but which, translated, meant one very simple thing. She mattered to his mother's recovery in a way that he, with all his money and all his power, could not replicate. And he had told her to get out of his car as if she were nobody. The awareness of that didn't arrive like lightning. It arrived slowly, in the most uncomfortable way, like cold water rising up your feet that you notice before you can move. He spun on his heels and headed for the elevator. He needed air. He needed distance. He needed a place where there were no charts, no white corridors, no eyes of a woman who carried her own weight without asking anyone for help. In the afternoon, when Lionel returned to room 407, Clara was no longer there. Millionaire Lim was sleeping. The room was in perfect order, pillow adjusted, window slightly ajar just right, a small note on the bedside table in Clara's handwriting. 18 medication. Don't forget. Good afternoon, Millionaire Lim. Lionel picked up the note, read it twice. Firm handwriting, no frills, direct. He folded the paper and placed it back on the table with a care that was not his usual standard, and that he himself would not have been able to explain if someone asked. He stood looking at his mother sleeping for a long moment, at the face that had aged while he was busy building empires, at the hands that had prepared his morning coffee for years, that now rested on the white sheet with a fragility he was not ready to face. When she holds my hand, I calm down. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he had arrived at the hospital, Lionel Lim was not angry at anything or anyone. He was simply ashamed, which was, he discovered at that moment, much worse. What he still didn't know, what would only become clear the next day when he arrived earlier than usual and overheard a conversation he shouldn't have heard, was that Clara had asked the nursing coordination for information about team reassignment. Not a transfer, not yet, but a silent, professional consultation, the kind people make when they haven't decided yet, but already know they might need an exit. And if she left room 407 for any reason, the doctor had been clear. It would be a risk that Millionaire Lim's current condition could not absorb without consequences. Fate in that hospital in the heart of Singapore had set a perfect trap, and Lionel Lim was right in the middle of it, still unaware of the magnitude of what he had done. The nursing coordinator of Mount Elizabeth Medical Center was Rebecca Tan, 51, short hair, thin-framed glasses, and a way of speaking that left no doubt about who was in charge on that floor. She had built her reputation in 23 years of hospital management by being exactly the kind of professional who didn't bow to anyone. Not to a chief doctor, not to a patient's family member, not to a man in an expensive suit who appeared at her office door without an appointment. Lionel appeared without an appointment. It was Tuesday morning. Clara had not yet arrived for her shift. The fourth-floor corridor was at its usual rhythm. Busy, functional, that specific background noise that mixes quick footsteps with low voices and the constant sound of equipment that never stops. Rebecca looked up from her screen when he entered. She did not stand up. "Mr. Lim," she said in the tone of someone who had already been warned about him by the reception staff. "How can I help you?" Lionel closed the door behind him, sat in the chair in front of the desk without being invited. An automatic gesture of a man who rarely waits for permission to occupy space. "I want to ensure that the nurse responsible for my mother's case remains in room 407, he said directly. "I heard there's a reassignment consultation open. I want that to be closed." Rebecca took off her glasses, placed them on the desk, looked at him with the calm of someone who had seen this movie before. "You are asking me to interfere in a decision that belongs to the nurse. I am asking that the case be treated with the priority it deserves," Lionel replied. His voice was controlled, but there was something beneath the control that leaked at the edges. "My mother is at a delicate moment." Dr. Lee was clear about the importance of continuity of care. "If there is anything that can be done to ensure that continuity, I want it done." "I understand your concern," Rebecca said. "And Dr. Lee is correct about the importance of continuity, but what you are describing is not an administrative decision. It is a personal decision of a professional. And that decision is not within my purview to interfere. Nor is it yours." Lionel leaned slightly forward. "I am financially responsible for my mother's hospitalization. I am paying for the private wing of this hospital. That doesn't. That guarantees you the best available care." Rebecca interrupted him with a firmness so polite it was almost impossible to rebut. It does not guarantee you the right to decide who works where. My team is not a personalized service contracted by the family. They are professionals with autonomy, with rights, and with decisions that I respect, even when it is not convenient for me." The silence that settled lasted a few seconds. Lionel stood up, buttoned his jacket with a mechanical gesture, looked at Rebecca with that expression of a man not accustomed to leaving a room without what he came for. "If there are any updates on my mother's condition," he said, "I want to be notified immediately." "As always," Rebecca replied, and had already put her glasses back on. He left, and Rebecca looked at the closed door for a moment, not with anger, but with that expression of someone who had just confirmed an old suspicion about a certain type of person. Clara arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later, entered through the side door, as she always did, changed her uniform in the third-floor changing room, and went up the stairs. An old habit, from the days when the elevator in the previous hospital where she had worked was always broken, and she had simply incorporated the stairs as part of her arrival ritual. Uncle Sam was at the ground-floor control desk when she passed. He called her name, Clara. She stopped, took 2 steps back. The doorman had a different expression than usual. It wasn't that of the man who asks about his daughter and comments on the weather. It was the expression of someone who had kept something and was weighing whether or not to deliver it. "That man from the car," he said, lowering his voice. "He was here early this morning, went up to the 4th floor, stayed up there for about 20 minutes before coming down." Clara remained quiet. "I don't know what he went to do," Uncle Sam continued, "but I thought you should know, because here inside, we look out for each other." It was a simple phrase, the kind that doesn't need explanation to hit deep. "Thank you, Uncle Sam," she said. He nodded and returned to his post. Clara stood still for a moment in the ground-floor corridor, that new information weighing on her in a way she couldn't quite organize yet. He had come before she arrived. He had gone up to the 4th floor, not to see his mother, because MDM Lim had said the day before that he always arrived after 10 a.m. It was 8:40 a.m. She went up the stairs with faster steps than usual. Rebecca was waiting for her at the coordination office door. It wasn't common. Rebecca didn't wait for anyone at the door. Rebecca stayed in her office and people came in. "Come in," she simply said. Clara entered, sat down, looked at the coordinator with that calm attention of someone who had learned that bad news doesn't get smaller if you over-prepare for it. "The family member from 407 was here," Rebecca said, without preamble. "Asked to ensure your permanence on the case, using a financial argument." Clara closed her eyes for half a second. "I said no," Rebecca continued. "I made it clear that your decision is yours and that no one interferes with it. But I thought you needed to know, because you have the right to know what's happening around your own name." "Thank you," Clara said. Her voice came out whole, but there was something beneath it that was not. "The reassignment consultation you opened." Rebecca placed her hands on the table. "I need an answer by tomorrow. Not because I'm pressuring you, but because I have another professional awaiting placement and I can't leave the process open any longer." Clara nodded. "I understand. You know what's at stake clinically," Rebecca said. "It wasn't a threat. It was a fact." Dr. Lee was clear. "I'm not telling you this to trap you. I'm telling you because you're the kind of professional who makes decisions with complete information, not half of it." Clara looked at her own hands for a moment. The same hands MDM Lim had described, the same hands Dr. Lee had put in clinical terms, the same hands Lionel Lim had tried, unknowingly, to use as a bargaining chip in a room that wasn't his. "By tomorrow," she said, and left. The 4th floor corridor was quieter than usual when Clara passed the door of room 407. MDM Lim was awake, but there was something different. She was looking out the window, her hands resting quietly on the sheet, without the usual welcoming smile. "Good morning," Clara said with her usual lightness. MDM Lim turned her head. The smile came, but it took an extra second to arrive. "Good morning, my dear." Clara began her routine check. Blood pressure, temperature, notes in the chart, but her eyes never stopped reading the patient's face. "Did you sleep well?" "More or less," MDM Lim replied. And then, after a pause, "Lionel was here early. Before you arrived." Clara did not stop what she was doing. "I know," she said neutrally. "He watched me sleep for a long time." MDM Lim continued, her voice low, thoughtful. "When I opened my eyes, he looked away, made that face like he was just checking his phone." She gave a sad and eternal smile at the same time. "He always did that since he was a child. When he was scared, he pretended to be busy." Clara finished her notes. "MDM Lim," she said carefully. "You need a quiet day today. No long visits, no tiring conversations." Dr. Lee was specific about this. Lim nodded, but held Clara's wrist before she moved away. Not her hand, her wrist. As if holding not the person, but time. Are you going to stay here? The 4 words fell into the room with a weight Clara had not anticipated. She looked at that woman, at the eyes that knew more than they said, at the question that wasn't about work schedules. It was about presence, about continuity, about the difference between being and appearing. And for the first time since she had opened that reassignment consultation, Clara felt the decision weighing on a different side. Not her side, Lim's side. I am here today, she answered truthfully, without promising beyond what she could. Lim released her wrist. She nodded with that quiet dignity of someone who has learned to accept what is given without demanding what is not guaranteed. Clara left the room with firm steps and stopped in the corridor, her back to the closed door, eyes fixed on the wall ahead. 24 hours to decide. Staying meant continuing on the same floor as the man who had destroyed in 2 minutes of coldness, something she had built with years of dignity. Leaving meant abandoning a 6-7-year-old woman who had done nothing but hold her hand as if clinging to life itself, without the only face that calmed her when the night grew too heavy. There was no clean exit, and it was, exactly at that moment, when she was alone in the corridor, weighing the impossible, that the elevator at the end of the corridor opened and Lim stepped out. They saw each other at the same time. This time, neither of them looked away immediately. And this time, on his face there was something that wasn't coldness, wasn't shock, wasn't the managed arrogance of the man in the car. It was guilt, real guilt. The kind that cannot be faked. But guilt, Clara knew better than anyone, is not the same as change. And she had learned in 8 years in the ICU, in long nights holding the hand of those who were scared, that the distance between feeling and acting can be exactly the space where people get lost. She turned sideways, entered the stairwell, and left him in the corridor with the weight of everything he still needed to prove. Clara didn't sleep. It wasn't the kind of insomnia that comes out of nowhere, without reason, without a face. It was the insomnia of someone who has a decision weighing on their chest, like a concrete object, with shape, with edges, with a weight that shifts every time you try to find a comfortable position. She lay in bed in her Sengkang apartment, looking at the ceiling with the uncomfortable clarity of someone who deep down already knows what they're going to do, but isn't quite ready to accept the cost of it. To stay. Not for him, never for him. For her, for Lim, for those hands that held her wrist as if holding time itself, for those eyes that knew more than they said and yet chose to trust. Clara had entered this profession for a simple reason that time had not erased. She believed that caring for someone was one of the only truly selfless acts a human being could perform. There was no audience in an ICU at dawn, no recognition in a corridor at 3 a.m. There was only the real, physical, constant presence of someone who chose to stay when everything became too heavy. Abandoning Lim to protect her own pride was not dignity, it was the exact opposite. She lay looking at the ceiling for a while longer. She thought of the mother she had lost too soon. She thought of the grandmother who had raised her with calloused hands and an open heart, who had once said in a small kitchen smelling of freshly brewed copio, that we don't choose the pain we receive, but we choose what we do with it. That carrying pain with dignity is not weakness. It is the most silent and real form of strength that exists. Clara had kept that phrase in a place she showed no one. And that dawn, in the bed of the small apartment she had earned with years of double shifts and sacrificed weekends, that phrase returned not as comfort, but as a compass. She knew what to do. She had always known. She just needed time to accept the cost. She arrived at the hospital 40 minutes before her shift began. She sought out Rebecca before even changing her uniform. "I'm staying," she said at the coordination office door. Rebecca looked at her for a second, nodded. "I will register your decision." Nothing more was said. It didn't need to be. Clara went to change her uniform, went up the stairs, pushed the door to room 407, and found Lim awake with a cup of tea cooling on the bedside table, and her eyes turned to the window, as if waiting for something that hadn't arrived yet. When Clara entered, Lim turned her head, and the smile that came this time didn't linger. It was immediate. It was whole. And it cost Clara more than any decision she had made the night before. Lionel arrived at 10:15 a.m. Clara was at the nursing station in the corridor when he exited the elevator. Green uniform, patient chart in hand, the posture of someone doing exactly what needs to be done and needing no one's approval for it. He stopped a few meters from her. "Can I speak to you?" "I'm on duty," she replied without looking up from the chart. "It's quick. Mr. Lim." she said, and this time looked at him directly, without evasion. If it's about your mother, speak to Dr. Lee. If it's about the schedule, speak to coordination. If it's about anything else, it's not the time or place. He stood still, his jaw slightly clenched. The words he had prepared, and it was visible that he had prepared them. There was a rehearsed stiffness in his posture, disappearing before they reached the surface. "All right," he said, and went to his mother's room. Clara returned her eyes to the chart. The letters were there, but she wasn't reading. She was thinking about how a person can occupy so much space in a corridor by doing nothing but existing. How someone's presence can alter the rhythm of the air around them without either of them wanting it to happen. How unjust, deeply, silently unjust it was, that the man who had destroyed something in her in 2 minutes of coldness now walked the same corridor where she worked, as if the world continued to spin at the same speed as before. Did it continue? Of course it continued. It just wasn't easy to accept before breakfast. What happened 2 hours later was not in anyone's plans. The cardiac monitor in room 407 sounded the alarm at 12:43 p.m. Clara was the first to enter. She was in the corridor less than 10 meters from the door. Behind her, in seconds, came nursing technician Priya and Dr. Lee, who fortunately was still on the floor making late rounds. MDM Lim was conscious, but her face had lost its color, and there was a difficulty in breathing that wasn't there in the morning, a visible effort, as if the air was heavier than it should be. "MDM Lim," Clara said in the voice she used in these situations, firm, close, without alarm. "I'm here. Look at me." MDM Lim looked. Her eyes were frightened. Not the kind of terror that paralyzes, but the silent kind of someone who realizes their own body is doing something without asking permission. "I feel strange," MDM Lim said, her voice weaker than usual. "I know. I'm here. You can breathe slowly." Dr. Lee took over the protocol. Clara stayed by MDM Lim's side, holding her hand, fulfilling the function that the doctor and all the instruments in the room could not fulfill alone, making that woman feel she was not going through this alone. There was a rhythm to it that only those who have done it many times know. It's not automatic. It's never automatic, because each person is different. Each hand holds differently. Each breath has a specific fear within it. But there is an emotional musculature that develops over time, that allows one to be present without getting lost, that allows one to hold without squeezing too tightly, that allows one to say, "I'm here," in a way that the other person's body believes before the mind processes. Clara had that musculature. She had built it one corridor at a time. Outside, Lionel had been asked to wait in the corridor by Priya, standard protocol, family member out during emergency care. He stood, leaning against the wall opposite the door, his phone in hand but the screen dark, his eyes fixed on the closed door, with an expression that had no clear name in any language. It was the face of a son who had just truly understood that his mother was mortal, not as a concept, but as a reality. And there was a specific cruelty in that white, silent corridor, in the fact that he was outside, standing, unable to do anything, while inside, there was a woman he had treated as invisible, doing exactly what he didn't know how to do: stay. 22 minutes later, Dr. Lee came out of the room. Lionel took 2 steps forward. "Her condition has changed," the doctor said with the careful objectivity of someone choosing every word. "It's not a critical emergency at this moment, but it's a warning sign we need to take seriously. We're going to adjust her medication and increase monitoring in the next few hours. She needs absolute rest, no emotional agitation, no prolonged visits." "I need to go in," Lionel said. 5 minutes, Dr. Lee replied. "No more than that, and nothing that could agitate her." Lionel nodded, waited for the doctor to move away, placed his hand on the doorknob, and stopped, because the door was ajar, not enough to see much, but enough to hear. Clara's voice, low and constant, came through the gap. "You were very brave just now, you know that?" And Medium Lim's voice, weaker, more whole. "I was scared, my dear." "I know, I saw." "And you stayed. That's courage." A pause. "Do you want me to stay until Lionel comes in?" "Stay," Medium Lim said. "Simple, without hesitation." "Then I'll stay." Lionel released the doorknob, stood in the corridor with those words echoing in a way he couldn't control. Not Clara's words, but his mother's. "I was scared, my dear." MDM Lim had called Clara my dear, with the same naturalness, the same warmth, the same intimacy with which she called him when he was 8 and woke up in the middle of the night with nightmares he couldn't describe. And there was something in that, not jealousy, not exactly, that came to Lionel like a mirror he hadn't asked for and wasn't ready to face. How many nights had his mother spent in that hospital before he arrived? How many dawns had been crossed, not by her son, but by a woman in a green uniform with a stethoscope around her neck, who stayed because she had chosen to stay, not out of contractual obligation, not out of protocol, but because she was the kind of person who couldn't do otherwise. How many times had MDM Lim looked at the door, waiting for him, and found Clara instead? He pushed the door open gently. Clara looked up, met his gaze, didn't leave immediately, waited a second, finished adjusting MDM Lim's pillow with a precise and gentle gesture, said something quietly to MDM Lim that he couldn't hear, and then stood up. She passed him to leave, and it was at that moment, when she was less than a meter away, when the smell of the hospital and the coffee she had drunk too early mingled in the small room's air, that Lionel said in a low voice, almost unwillingly, "Thank you." Clara stopped, did not turn around. She stood with her back to him for 2 seconds that weighed more than any speech he could have prepared, and then left without responding, not out of coldness, not out of cruelty, but because thank you at that moment was not yet enough. Thank you was the easiest currency to spend. It cost nothing, proved nothing, changed nothing of what had happened on the Orchard Road pavement, with the traffic honking and the doorman watching, and her leaving with her backpack on her shoulder, dignity intact on the outside and broken on the inside. She went to the nursing station, sat in the chair, opened MDM Lim's chart, and began to record the care with firm, steady handwriting. Priya, the nursing technician, 29, hair tied back, attentive eyes, came up behind her with a cup of kopio kosong and placed it on the desk without a word. A gesture from a colleague, the kind that needs no explanation. Clara looked at the cup, looked at Priya. "Thank you." "You stayed?" Priya said quietly. "Everyone here knows you stayed. And everyone knows why." Clara didn't answer, but there was something on her face that, for a very brief instant, revealed the true weight of what she was carrying. It wasn't regret for the decision to stay. It was the exhaustion of having to be strong at all times, in all corridors, in front of all eyes, without ever having a safe place to simply stop, without ever being able to say, "Today I can't," without ever having the option of being the person who needs care, instead of always being the person who cares. Priya stood beside her for a moment, said nothing more. She didn't need to. Sometimes, the greatest form of care is simply not leaving. In the afternoon, as Clara's shift was coming to an end, Rebecca appeared in the corridor with an expression she recognized immediately. Bad administrative news, the bureaucratic kind, without emotion, but with real consequences. "I need to inform you," Rebecca said in a low voice, away from other ears. "With the worsening of the patient's condition in 407, protocol requires the case to be reclassified. This means daily supervision by Dr. Lee and, potentially, the involvement of a second specialist. Your workload on this shift will increase significantly in the coming weeks." Clara remained quiet. "Furthermore," Rebecca continued, "the board of directors has been informed about the reassignment consultation you opened. Not by me. I don't know by whom, but it's recorded. And in case of any future complications with the patient, this history may be reviewed." The meaning of that arrived slowly and with surgical precision. If MDM Lim's condition worsened, if anything went out of control, the fact that Clara had opened a reassignment consultation could be used to question her commitment to the case. It wouldn't be fair, it wouldn't be right, but it would be possible. And in the real world, possible was enough to destroy a career built on 8 years of dedication. Clara felt the ground become slightly unstable beneath her. Not the literal ground. The ground that exists inside people when something that was solid suddenly shows a crack that wasn't there in the morning. Someone had leaked that information to the board, and Clara knew, with a certainty that needed no proof, who had been in that hospital early enough to have access to that kind of administrative data, who had gone up to the 4th floor before she arrived, who had tried to use influence to solve what money couldn't buy, and who, upon being refused, had left traces that now threatened an entire career. It wasn't calculated malice. She knew that. It was the kind of damage powerful people cause, without realizing it, because they are so used to moving pieces that they forget the pieces have names, have histories, have 8 years of night shifts, and a grandmother who taught that dignity is not negotiable. But the damage was done, and she would have to bear the consequences of a decision that hadn't even been hers. "I understand," Clara said to Rebecca. Her voice came out whole, with effort. "If you need anything," Rebecca said. "My door is open." Clara nodded, waited for Rebecca to move away, stood alone in the corridor for an instant, with the constant hospital noise around her and that new weight added to all the others she already carried. She looked at the closed door of room 407, at the path between where she was and where she needed to go, and understood that staying had been the right decision, but that the price of doing the right thing in this world rarely came with a discount. The battle was not over. It had only changed form, and she was still standing for now. The letter was on the coordination office desk when Clara arrived the next morning. It wasn't a common envelope. It was the kind of document that comes on letterhead, with an institutional logo in the upper left corner, and language that seems neutral but isn't. Language constructed by people who had learned to cause damage with protocol vocabulary. Rebecca was sitting across the desk. There was no coffee, no introductory conversation, just the paper and the heavy silence of someone who needed to deliver something they didn't want to deliver. "The board has opened an internal inquiry," Rebecca said, "regarding the case in room 407. Clara looked at the paper without picking it up. Based on what? Based on the recorded reassignment consultation, combined with a report of documented tension between the professional and the responsible family member. Rebecca paused. "I'm not saying I agree. I'm saying what's written." "Tension," Clara repeated. The word came out with a specific weight, not of anger, but of recognition. Someone had transformed what had happened in the corridor, the two crossing paths. Her looking away, him trying to speak into evidence of professional conflict. They had taken reality and twisted it a few degrees, enough to change what appeared to be true, without needing to completely lie. It was an elegant blow, the kind that only works when the person who delivers it has more power than the person who receives it. "The inquiry does not mean punishment," Rebecca continued, "but it means that while it's open, you cannot be reallocated, you cannot request a transfer, and any complications with the patient will be reviewed in that context." Clara processed each word with the calm of someone who had learned that reacting too quickly in such situations is exactly what the other side expects. "Can I see the report?" "Not yet. The process has a 4-8-hour deadline to release documentation to the investigated party." "Understood." She picked up the paper, read it, folded it, returned it to the desk. "Will I work normally?" "Yes, until further notice." Clara stood up, buttoned her lab coat with her usual precise movements. She looked at Rebecca with that direct gaze that neither asked for validation nor offered collapse. "Thank you for being fair with me from the start." And she left. The fourth-floor corridor was at its usual pace. Trolleys, footsteps, low voices. The hospital functioned with the productive indifference of a machine that stops for no individual pain. Clara went directly to the nursing station, picked up Niblem's chart, checked the night shift notes with the attention of someone looking for any variation, any sign that needed adjustment. Priya came up beside her with the expression of someone who already knew. "You heard?" Clara asked, without looking up. "The hospital's small," Priya said quietly. "I'm sorry." "No need," Clara replied. And it was true. Pity at that moment was the kind of thing that softened what needed to be firm. She went to room 407. Lim was sitting in bed, leaning against the pillows, with an open book on her lap that clearly wasn't being read. Her eyes were on the window. Singapore's light was gray. The kind of morning the city has when the clouds arrive before the sun and stay. "Good morning, MDM Lim." MDM Lim turned. The smile came, but her eyes were not rested. There was something in them that Clara recognized. A bad night's sleep. The kind that comes not from physical pain, but from thoughts that won't stop. "Good morning, my dear." A pause. "Are you all right?" Clara began her routine check with her usual movements. "I am." "How was your night?" "Long," MDM Lim said. And then, with that direct and gentle manner that was her hallmark, "Lionel stayed late. We talked." Clara did not alter the rhythm of her notes. "That's good, he stayed. He told me something," MDM Lim said slowly, like someone choosing the ground before taking each step, "that he treated you badly outside the hospital, before you started taking care of me, that he regrets it and doesn't know how to fix it." The silence that settled in the room was different from other silences. It had texture, it had a lateral weight, like a wall that appears where you didn't expect it. Clara finished writing, closed the chart. "MDM Lim," she said with genuine care. "You don't need to carry that. It's not your responsibility." "I know it's not," MDM Lim replied. "But he's my son, and I know him better than he knows himself." She looked at Clara with those eyes that saw beyond what people showed. "I'm not asking you to forgive him. I don't have that right. I'm just telling you that his heart is broken in a way he can't name yet." Clara looked at that woman for a moment. There was a gentle trap in that conversation. Not intentional, Not manipulative, but real. The trap of someone who is loved by someone who also loves the other side. The impossible position of being the link between two people in conflict without anyone explicitly asking for it. "You need to rest," Clara said with gentle firmness. "Doctor, Lee will be making rounds later, and I don't want him to find you agitated." Miem Lim nodded, but held Clara's hand for a second before she moved away. "Whatever is happening outside this room," Miem Lim said quietly, "I want you to know that you are the best thing that has happened to me in here. And I'm not saying that for my son. I'm saying it because it's true." Clara squeezed her hand once with firmness, her signature touch, and left before anything else could appear on her face. He was in the corridor, not near the room door, but further down, leaning against the wall, next to the window at the end of the corridor, from where one could see the city below, Singapore. In the middle of the morning, dense and noisy, and completely oblivious to everything happening on the 4th floor of Mount Elizabeth Medical Center. Lionel was in a simpler suit than before, no tie, his hair slightly different, like someone who had slept at the hospital or nearby. And there was something in his posture, his shoulders subtly different, not slumped, but less rigidly held than usual, which Clara noticed before she could prevent herself from noticing. She headed for the stairs. "Clara, it wasn't Miss, it wasn't you. It was her name," spoken in a voice that had lost the layer of control it had in previous encounters. She stopped, didn't turn around immediately, breathed, then turned. "I heard about the inquiry," he said, his eyes direct, unswerving. "I caused that. It wasn't intentional, but it was me. I went to coordination. I went to administration. I meddled in things I shouldn't have, and unintentionally put your name into a process that shouldn't exist." Clara remained quiet. "I want to correct this," he continued. "Can I go to the board? Can I retract any statement that came from my name? Can I—" "Stop," she said. The word came out low, but stopped him completely. "You went to coordination to use money to keep me on the case?" she said, her voice careful not to lose her train of thought. "When that didn't work, you went to administration, and what you said there, whatever it was, generated an inquiry into my professional conduct, into 8 years of my career." A pause. "And now you want to go there again to correct it, using the same influence that caused the problem." He didn't answer because there was no answer that wouldn't confirm exactly what she had said. "You can't fix this by going there," Clara continued. "Because the problem isn't the process. The process is just the symptom. The problem is that you believe everything has a solution if you apply enough pressure in the right place. And sometimes it does, but not when the thing you broke is someone else's reputation. There's no shortcut for that." Lionel closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, there was something different inside. It wasn't the guilt from the corridor 2 days ago. That one was still comfortable, still fit within his chest, without demanding much. It was something else, harder, more difficult to name. It was shame that had finally found its true address. "What can I do?" he said. And for the first time since the car, the question had no strategy within it. It was genuine. It was the question of someone who is on the ground and has finally stopped pretending not to be. Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Nothing," she replied. "For now, absolutely nothing," and went to the stairwell. The inquiry progressed faster than Rebecca had anticipated. In the late afternoon, a board member named Dr. Eugene Wong, 58, gray-haired, the kind of man who built authority by being efficient rather than human, asked to speak with Clara in a small room on the 2nd floor, used for administrative meetings, which had that specific silence of a place where uncomfortable decisions are communicated. He was direct, based on the documented history of tension between the professional and the responsible family member, and considering the delicate clinical moment of the patient. The board believes that a temporary team rearrangement may be more appropriate to preserve the patient's therapeutic environment. Clara listened to every word with full attention. "Temporary rearrangement?" she repeated. "Temporary," he confirmed. "While the inquiry is ongoing." What did that mean? Translated from protocol vocabulary to real English, it was this. They were considering removing her from Miem Lim's case, not as a declared punishment, but as a precautionary measure, which was in practice the same thing with a different name. Removing her now, with Miem Lim at her most fragile since hospitalization, could destabilize the patient in a way that Dr. Lee had described as clinically risky. And Clara knew this possibility had not been put on the table by accident. Someone had calculated that the clinical risk of removing her would act as pressure, that she would yield before any formal decision was made, that the love she had developed for that patient, would be the most efficient lever to control her. She looked at Dr. Eugene Wong for a moment, too long to be comfortable. "When will the board have a final decision?" she asked. 48 hours. Clara stood up, buttoned her lab coat. "I will be available for any process you need to conduct," she said, "with one condition, that Dr. Lee be consulted before any decision about team rearrangement is implemented. The patient's clinical state cannot be evaluated by administrative management." Dr. Wong nodded with the expression of someone who didn't expect this level of composure. Clara left, walked down the stairs to the ground floor, passed Uncle Sam's post without stopping, pushed the side door of the hospital, and stepped onto the pavement. Singapore was the way Singapore always is: noisy, indifferent, full of people passing by without looking around. Clara stood on the pavement for a moment, still wearing her lab coat, with the weight of 48 hours opening before her like a chasm she needed to cross without knowing if there was ground on the other side. 8 years of a career, an open inquiry, a patient who had called her "my dear," a man who had destroyed something in her with 2 minutes of carelessness, and who now needed 48 hours to understand that some damages have no shortcut. And she stood on a Singapore pavement, with the city's noise around her, no grandmother to call, no safe place to rest her weariness, no one to come and say, "I'm here, you can breathe slowly." For the first time in this entire story, Clara Tan felt the ground. Truly, not metaphorically, truly. And the question that hung in the air as Singapore continued to spin around her with its usual indifference was simple and impossible at the same time. How long can a person be strong for everyone, but not for herself? Clara's decision was not born of anger. It was born from the same place where all her important decisions came from. That silent internal space she had learned to listen to before the external noise became too loud to hear anything. She spent the 48 hours Dr. Wong had set, working normally, full shifts, charts in order. MDM Lim received the same care as always. No more, no less, because more would be a display and less would be abandonment, and Clara did neither. But within those 48 hours, while the hospital functioned around her with its usual productive indifference, Clara had made a decision that no one knew yet. She would not wait for the board to decide for her. On the morning of the second day, she arrived before everyone. She changed her uniform in the empty changing room, went up the stairs, and went directly to Rebecca's office. The coordinator arrived 10 minutes later and found Clara sitting in front of her with an envelope in her hand and an expression that was neither defeat nor revolt, but clarity. "I am submitting my voluntary resignation from MDM Lim's case in room 407, Clara said. "Not as a response to the inquiry, but as my own choice, made before any institutional decision is communicated." Rebecca stood in the doorway for a second. "Clara, I need it to be recorded this way." Clara continued with gentle firmness, "That I left because I chose to leave, not because I was removed. This distinction matters for my professional record, and I will not give it up." Rebecca entered, closed the door, and sat down slowly. "Are you sure?" "I am," Clara replied. "I am also submitting a second document requesting a transfer to the general ward on the second floor, effective immediately. If there is no available position, I request full resignation from Mount Elizabeth Medical Center." The silence that settled was the kind Rebecca clearly had not anticipated for that morning. "You are giving up a case that Dr. Lee himself said was clinically dependent on your presence," Rebecca said, not as an argument, but as a fact that needed to be stated aloud. "I know," Clara replied, "and I have written a care transfer letter with all the necessary guidelines so that the next professional can continue without prejudice to the patient. It's inside the envelope." Rebecca looked at the envelope, looked at Clara. "This will cost you dearly," she said quietly. "It already has," Clara replied. "The difference is that now the cost is my choice." Rebecca took the envelope, opened it, read it in silence, and when she finished, there was something on her face that was not administrative approval. It was respect, the kind that doesn't need protocol to exist. "I'll process it today," she said. Clara stood up, buttoned her lab coat for the last time in that room. "Thank you for being fair to me from the start." And she left. She went to room 407 one last time. MDM Lim was awake, with her usual book on her lap, and her eyes more rested than in recent days. The medication adjustment had taken effect. Her breathing was more regular. Color had returned to her face with that discreet slowness that only those who observe closely can notice. Clara entered with her usual smile, checked vital signs, noted them in the chart with her usual firm handwriting, and then stood by the bed for a moment that was different from the others, not in gesture, but in weight. Then Lim felt it, looked up from her book. "What is it?" "I came to say goodbye," Clara said. Simple, direct, because MDM Lim deserved the truth unvarnished. MDM Lim was quiet for an instant. Her eyes didn't fill with tears immediately. She processed it first, like someone who has learned to receive difficult news without letting it shatter everything at once. "Are you leaving the hospital?" "I'm leaving your case," Clara replied. "A colleague of mine, Nurse Silvana, will be taking over your care starting today. She's excellent. You'll like her. That's not why you're leaving, is it?" MDM Lim said, and it wasn't the question. Clara looked at that woman, at her white hair, at her marked hands, at her eyes that saw beyond what people showed. "No," she replied honestly. "It's not just that." Madame Lim slowly accepted it, with that quiet dignity of someone who accepts without agreeing, because she understood that some situations are bigger than the room where they happen. "You were the best thing in this hospital," she said. Her voice was firm, but there was a very slight tremor at the edges, the kind that appears when someone is holding back something they'd rather not. "I want you to know that, regardless of anything." Clara held her hand once, with that firmness that was her hallmark, not a sentimental farewell squeeze, but a real presence, the kind that says, "You truly existed for me. Take care." Clara said, "And make your son come earlier." MDM Lim gave a small, involuntary laugh, the kind that escapes when emotion finds something true along the way. Clara left. The envelope for Lionel was on the bedside table when MDM Lim looked to the side. Clara had left it before entering the room. She had asked Priya to place it there after she had left. She didn't want to be present when he arrived, not because she was afraid of the encounter, but because some things need to be read in silence, without the presence of the writer, to reach the depth of truth. Lionel arrived at 9:40 a.m., earlier than his old pattern, earlier than any day since his mother had been hospitalized. MDM Lim was quiet when he entered. He noticed immediately. He knew that silence. He had grown up with it. "What's wrong?" "I have a letter for you," MDM Lim said, pointing to the bedside table. He picked up the envelope, saw his name written in that firm, unembellished hand he had learned to recognize. He opened it. "Lionel, I am not writing this to explain myself. I am writing because I believe some things need to be stated clearly before silence distorts them. You treated me as if I didn't exist at a time when I carried the weight of 2 shifts and the responsibility for lives that weren't my own. That happened. It won't unhappen. But I am not leaving because of that car. I am leaving because what came after, the actions, the processes, the inquiry, showed that you still believe power solves what power broke. And I cannot work in an environment where my name is being used as a piece in a game I didn't choose to play. Your mother is an extraordinary woman. Caring for her was a privilege I carry with me. She will be fine, not because I stayed, but because she is strong in a way most people don't recognize, because they are too busy looking in the wrong place. I am not angry with you. I am tired of a specific kind of invisibility, one that comes not from malice, but from the carelessness of those who never needed to be seen to exist. You have time to change this, but not with me as a witness. This needs to happen because you decide, not because someone is watching. Clara. Lionel read it twice. The second time, he stood with the paper in his hand for a time. MDM Lim didn't measure, because in 67 years, she had learned that some moments don't fit into a clock. "She's gone," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," MDM Lim replied. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences in that room. It had a specific texture, that of something that can no longer be undone, that has passed the point where regret still changes anything and reached the point where only action counts. Lionel carefully folded the letter, placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, not on the table, not in his bag, but in the pocket closest to his chest. And then he did something MDM Lim hadn't seen since he was perhaps 12 years old. He sat on the edge of her bed, not a visitor's chair, but on the edge of the bed, like a son, like someone who had finally stopped pretending he was just passing through. "Mum," he said. His voice came out differently, without the layer of control she had heard in every conversation over the past few years. "When Dad left, I decided I would never need anyone, that I would build everything myself and that would protect me." MDM Lim remained quiet, listening. "I built," he continued, "everything I set out to do, but I did it thinking that building was the same as living. And it's not." A long pause. "I treated that woman as if she were an obstacle, and she was carrying the world on her shoulders without asking for anyone's applause. She is like that," MDM Lim said quietly. "I know," Lionel replied now. "I know." His mother placed her hand over his, said nothing, Because there was nothing to say that gesture didn't say better. They stayed like that for a while, mother and son, in a hospital room in Singapore, with the noisy city outside, and that specific silence of someone who has finally stopped running from himself. That afternoon, Lionel went to the second floor of Mount Elizabeth Medical Center, not to find Clara. He knew she was no longer in the private wing, and he didn't go looking for her. He went to Dr. Eugene Wong's office. He entered without an appointment, as he had done with Rebecca weeks ago, but this time his posture was different. There was no strategy in his body, no angle of someone who had come to negotiate. I wish to formally retract any report or statement that came from my name and contributed to the open inquiry against Nurse Clara Tan, he said, standing, without sitting. And I want it recorded that her departure from the case was exclusively her decision, made before any institutional communication, and that there is no conflict of conduct on her part to be investigated. Doctor, Wong looked at him for a moment. Do you understand that this closes the inquiry without a formal conclusion? I understand, Lionel said. And I also understand that I should have understood this before causing the problem. I am correcting what is possible to correct. The director nodded, made notes, said the process would be closed in 24 hours. Lionel left the room without knowing if Clara would find out, without knowing if that would change anything between them. He did it because it was right, not because someone was watching. And it was the first time in a long time that he had acted that way. Clara learned via institutional email the next day that the inquiry had been closed without conclusion, without the applicant's name, without additional explanation. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then closed her laptop and went to work. Because life went on. Because the second floor had patients who needed her. Because closing an unjust inquiry didn't erase what had been done. At most, it showed that someone had finally understood the difference between power and responsibility. It was something, it wasn't everything. And Clara Tan, 34, 8 years in the ICU, dignity intact, knew better than anyone that some stories need more than one right gesture to find the place where they should arrive. Time would tell if this was the beginning or the end. For now, it was just a step from one side to the other. Nurse Silvana was competent. Clara knew that because Priya had mentioned it in the second floor corridor in one of those quick conversations between shifts that carry more information than they seem. Silvana was attentive, punctual, technically secure. My DM Lim was being well cared for. That's what mattered. Clara repeated this to herself in moments when the second floor corridor grew too silent and her thoughts slipped to the fourth floor without asking permission. The work on the second floor was different. A faster pace, more varied cases, less time for the kind of prolonged presence she had developed with MDM Lim. It was good, in its own way. It demanded an adaptation from her that kept her busy enough not to dwell too much in her own head. But there were moments. There were always moments. Lionel had not attempted contact, had not appeared on the second floor, had not sent a message. She didn't even know if he had her number, and he clearly hadn't sought to find out. The closure of the inquiry had arrived via institutional email, dry and bureaucratic, without a name, without a personal note. She had understood his choice. He had done the right thing, without using it as currency, without appearing soon after, expecting to receive something in return. He had acted, stepped back, and left her space intact. It was different. It was the first concretely different thing he had done since the car. Clara did not turn this into hope. She turned it into data, new information about a man she was still learning to read, not with her heart, but with the part of her that had learned in 8 years in the ICU that people show who they are, not in what they say, but in what they do when no one is looking. MDM Lim was discharged on a Tuesday morning. Clara didn't know the date. She found out through the hospital's internal system when she updated the patient dashboard at the start of her shift and saw room 407 listed as available for new occupancy. Previous name, Lourdes Lim, status, discharged. She stared at that line on the screen for a moment, then breathed and went to work. The call came 3 days later, an unknown number. She didn't usually answer unknown numbers during her shift, but there was something, an instinct, that had no rational explanation, that made her press the green button. Clara, the voice was Madame Lim's. She recognized it before the name. She recognized it by the texture, by the cadence, by that specific way of pronouncing syllables carefully, as if treating words as something that could break if thrown carelessly. MDM Lim, she said, and there was something in her own voice that was not entirely under control. I asked the hospital for your number, MDM Lim said, with that direct and gentle tone that was her hallmark. I hope you don't mind. I don't mind. I've been discharged. I'm home. A pause. I wanted you to know. Clara closed her eyes for a second. That's good, she said. And it was the truest sentence she had spoken in days. I missed you very much, Millionaire said. Simple, without drama. I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it because you deserve to know that you truly made a difference. The kind of difference that doesn't appear in any document. Clara didn't answer immediately. There was a pressure behind her eyes that she knew well. The pressure of emotion that had found no outlet for too long and was looking for a crack. Thank you for calling, she managed to say. There's one more thing, Millionaire said. And there was something in her tone. A careful lightness, the kind that wraps a delicate subject in cotton before delivering it. Lionel wants to see you. He didn't ask me to say this. He doesn't know I'm calling. But I've been a mother for 38 years, and I've learned that sometimes we need a push no one asked for. Clara remained quiet. He's changed, Millionaire continued. I'm not asking you to believe my word. I'm asking you to give yourself the chance to see with your own eyes. What you do after that is your decision. It always has been. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences in this story. It had no tension, no weight of an impossible decision. It had only the open space of something that still had no form and might or might not gain one. I'll think about it, Clara said. That's all I asked for, Millionaire replied. And there was a smile in her voice, clear, like light entering a window early in the morning. She thought for 2 days, not anxiously. She didn't stay awake, didn't rehash conversations, didn't build scenarios. She thought in the way she thought about decisions that mattered. She let the question exist within her without forcing an answer, and waited for the answer to come from the right place. It arrived on a normal morning. As she walked down the hospital stairs after her shift, and the Singapore sun streamed through the third-floor window, in that specific way the city has on certain days, golden, warm, completely indifferent to the fact that some people are in the middle of something important. She stopped on the third step and knew. The cafe was called The Simple Brew, and was 2 blocks from Mount Elizabeth Medical Center. The kind of small place that exists in the cracks of big cities, with 4 tables, the smell of wood and freshly brewed coffee, no loud music, no rush. Clara arrived first, ordered a copio, and sat facing the door. She had chosen the place, set the time, arrived first. Not out of anxiety, but because she wanted to be established in the space before he arrived. It was a small, and absolutely conscious distinction. Lionel entered 3 minutes later, no suit, dark trousers, a simple shirt, his hair less controlled than in any previous encounter. And there was something in his posture, not in slumped shoulders, not in averted gaze, but in a kind of openness in the way he occupied the space, that was different from anything she had seen in him until then. He saw her, paused for a second, walked to the table, and sat on the other side. He didn't start with an apology, didn't start with a prepared speech. He started with the only thing left when everything else had been said or done, or tried and failed. Thank you for coming. Clara enveloped the cup with both hands, looked at him with that direct gaze he had learned to recognize. The one that neither asks nor offers, but simply evaluates with honesty. I came because I wanted to, she said. Not because someone convinced me. I know, he replied. Your mother told me she called. Your mother? She corrected with a trace of dry humor that was new between them. He gave a small, involuntary laugh, the kind that escapes when attention finds something unexpectedly human along the way. And then he became serious again. I spent my whole life thinking that controlling everything was the same as caring for everything, he said. My father left when I was 8, without any explanation, and I decided at 8 that I would never depend on anyone because dependence was the same as vulnerability. A pause. I built an entire life on that, and it worked. Until the day I was afraid of losing my mother and found an exhausted woman in a car and treated her as if her exhaustion was my inconvenience. Clara listened without interrupting. I'm not telling you this to justify myself, Lionel continued. There's no justification. I'm telling you because you wrote in a letter that I acted as if power solved what power broke. And you were right. And it took me more time than it should have to truly understand that. The coffee cooled between Clara's hands. What did you do with the board? She said after a moment. Retracted the reports, closed the inquiry. It was the least I could do, he said without hesitation. It was, she agreed. And you did it without expecting me to know. He didn't answer because there was nothing to add that wouldn't diminish the gesture. Clara looked at the cup, then at him. I don't know what this is, she said with the direct honesty that was her hallmark. I don't know if it's the beginning of something or just the closing of a story that started badly. I'm not going to pretend I know. I don't know either. Lionel replied. And there was a specific relief in that admission. The relief of two adults who had stopped pretending to have answers they don't have. What I do know, Clara continued, is that I came here, and that's more than I imagined I would do a few weeks ago. Lionel looked at her for a moment, at that woman who had gotten out of his car, with her backpack on her shoulder and her dignity intact, who had stayed in a hospital when everything pushed her to leave, who had written a letter that asked for nothing and gave everything, who had appeared in that small Singapore cafe, not because she was convinced, but because she wanted to. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can." "The coffee stain on your uniform," he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost difficulty continuing. "That night in the car, I saw it, and I thought." He stopped, breathed. "I thought something I'm ashamed to have thought. And I need you to know that I know now what that stain truly meant." Clara looked at him. "What did it mean?" she asked. "It wasn't a test. It was genuine." "That you were working while I was sleeping," he said. "That you had spent hours on your feet caring for people who weren't your family, for a salary that doesn't pay what it's worth in a system that rarely says thank you." A pause. "And that when you finally stopped, you got into a car by mistake because you were too exhausted to notice. And I treated you as if you were the problem." The silence that followed was the cleanest of the entire story. There was no tension, no weight of a pending decision. There were just two people sitting at a small table in Singapore, with coffee cooling between their hands, in the exact space where some stories find where they should have begun. Clara looked at him for a long moment and then did something neither of them had planned. She pushed her cup to the center of the table, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and said, "Order another coffee for me." It wasn't declared forgiveness. It wasn't an announced romance. It wasn't a resolution wrapped with a bow. It was a cup of coffee. It was staying a little longer. It was, for someone who had learned to read what people say when they say nothing, exactly enough. Lionel called the attendant, and for the first time since that night, on Orchard Road, there was something between them that was not guilt, not distance, not the tension of those who still don't know if they will get hurt. It was time, real, present, unhurried time. The kind that only appears when two people finally stop running and decide, without any guarantee, to see what lies on the other side of silence. Outside, Singapore continued noisy, dense, indifferent as always. But at that small table, with the smell of coffee and wood and morning light entering through the window, something had found its place. Not perfect, not without cost, but real. And real, Clara Tan had learned in every corridor of every hospital she had worked in, is always more than enough to begin. Weeks later, on the day MDM Lim walked down the aisle as her son's maid of honor, in an ivory dress, with that smile that made the room seem larger, she stopped beside Clara for a second before walking on. She said nothing, just squeezed her hand once, the same way she did in room 407, as if clinging to life itself.